New York City never stops moving. It's a place where dreams are made, or broken, where the rich sit in penthouse suites, sipping champagne while just a few blocks away, the forgotten huddle under tattered blankets, hoping to make it through another cold night. The streets were alive with energy. Taxi horns blared in frustration, high heels clacked against the pavement, and businessmen in expensive suits hurried past, too caught up in their conversations about stocks and mergers to notice anything around them. It was just another evening in Manhattan. And Charlie? He was just another invisible man in the crowd. Charlie sat slumped against the rough brick wall outside an upscale cafe. His clothes were worn, his once sturdy boots had holes near the toes, and his hands, red and cracked from the bitter cold, clutched a small cardboard sign. Just trying to get back on my feet. Anything helps. God bless. The words were simple, but they carried a lifetime of pain. People walked by, their faces indifferent, their eyes avoiding him like he wasn't even there. Some clutched their designer bags tighter as they passed. Others turned their heads, pretending not to see him. Charlie sighed, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He had been here for hours, but the cup beside him held only a few crumpled dollar bills and loose change. It wasn't enough. Not for a warm meal. Not for a place to sleep. Not for anything that might make tomorrow even slightly easier. He had long given up expecting kindness, until he walked out of the cafe. The cafe door swung open, and for a brief moment, warm air drifted out, carrying the rich scent of fresh espresso and baked pastries. Charlie barely glanced up. People walked out of cafes all the time, laughing, sipping their overpriced lattes, wrapped in expensive wool coats that cost more than he had made in the last 6 months. They never looked at him. They never stopped. Why would this time be any different? But then, he caught a glimpse of the man stepping onto the sidewalk. He wasn't like the others. No designer labels, no flashy jewelry, just a simple black wool coat, dark jeans, and an old pair of boots that looked comfortable rather than expensive. He held a steaming paper coffee cup in one hand, his other tucked into his pocket. Something about the way he moved caught Charlie's attention. Not rushed, not distracted, just calm. Charlie hesitated before raising a trembling hand. "Hey, sir." His voice was rough from the cold, barely louder than a whisper. The man slowed, turning slightly. Charlie swallowed. He didn't want to beg, but he had no choice. "Could you spare $1?" The man stopped mid-step. For the first time all day, someone actually looked at him. Not through him, not past him, but at him. Charlie held his breath. Most people ignored him completely. Others scoffed or muttered something under their breath before hurrying away. But this man, he wasn't doing either. He was just watching him. And for reasons Charlie couldn't explain, that was more unsettling than being ignored. The man stood still, his dark eyes studying Charlie with quiet curiosity. For a moment, Charlie regretted asking. Maybe this was one of those guys who would sneer at him, tell him to get a job, or worse, give a fake sympathetic smile before walking away. But that didn't happen. Instead, the man tilted his head slightly. $1? He repeated, his voice deep and smooth. Charlie shifted uncomfortably. Something about the way he said it, like he was genuinely curious, threw him off. "Yeah," Charlie mumbled, suddenly embarrassed. "Just enough for a coffee, maybe." The man didn't react right away. He didn't reach for his wallet, didn't shake his head and move on. Instead, he took a slow sip from his coffee and, without a word, walked over to the bench just a few feet away. Then, to Charlie's complete disbelief, he sat down. Charlie frowned. Most people couldn't get away from him fast enough. Even the ones who tossed him a few coins did it without stopping. But this man had just sat down? Charlie's stomach twisted. Something about this wasn't normal. After a moment, the man turned his head toward him, one hand still wrapped around his coffee cup. "How'd you end up here?" he asked. Charlie stiffened. Most people never asked. They assumed they already knew that he was lazy, a drunk, or someone who had ruined his own life. But this man? He sounded like he actually wanted to know. Charlie hesitated. The words caught in his throat. He looked down at the cracked sidewalk beneath him. "I used to have a job." The man said nothing, waiting. Charlie swallowed, rubbing his hands together to fight off the cold. "Construction. I was good at it. Had a wife, a little apartment in Brooklyn." His voice wavered. "Then I got hurt." The man raised an eyebrow, but not in a judgmental way, more like he was listening intently. "Doctor said I'd be out for months," Charlie continued. "Boss couldn't wait around for me to get better. Had to let me go. Bills piled up. My wife." His voice caught, and he clenched his jaw before forcing the words out. "She took our kid and left. Said she couldn't stick around while I figured it out." A heavy silence settled between them. Charlie exhaled, shaking his head. "Tried to find work, but no one wants to hire a guy with a busted knee and no address." His lips curled into a bitter smile. One bad thing led to another. And, well, he gestured vaguely at his surroundings. The man was silent for a long moment. Charlie expected him to stand up now, to nod politely and say something generic like, "That's tough, man," before walking away. But he didn't. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his coat. Charlie assumed he was going to pull out a couple of dollar bills, maybe a $5, if he was feeling generous. But when the man's hand emerged, he wasn't holding a few crumpled bills. He was holding a crisp $100 bill. Charlie's breath hitched. His eyes flickered from the bill to the man's face. I can't take that." The man smiled faintly. "Do whatever you want with it." Charlie hesitated, his fingers hovering over the bill. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man took another slow sip of his coffee, then met Charlie's gaze with a look so calm, so sure, that it sent chills down his spine. Because sometimes a little help can go a long way. And just like that, he stood up, gave Charlie a small nod, and walked away. Charlie sat there, staring at the bill in his trembling hands. He had asked for $1. But somehow, this meant so much more. The next morning, Charlie woke up in the homeless shelter, still clutching the half-empty coffee cup he had bought with part of the $100 bill. For the first time in years, he had gone to bed with a full stomach. The shelter was a simple place, rows of metal-framed beds, the air thick with the scent of old blankets and strong coffee. Conversations murmured softly around him, men talking about the jobs they wished they had, the families they lost, the dreams they were trying to hold on to. Charlie rubbed his hands over his tired face. It was just another day. He would go back to his usual spot, hold his sign, and hope for enough change to eat again. But then, a strange noise, a low, smooth hum outside the shelter. It was different from the usual sounds of the city. No sputtering engines, no honking taxis, just a controlled, powerful purr of something expensive. Curious murmurs filled the room. Charlie turned toward the front windows where people had gathered, their faces pressed against the glass. "What the hell?" someone muttered. Charlie frowned and stood, making his way toward the group. Outside, parked directly in front of the shelter, was a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom. The kind of car billionaires drove. The kind of car that looked completely out of place in this neighborhood. The glossy paint gleamed under the morning sun. The massive grille, the Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament. It was the kind of car Charlie had only ever seen in movies. The door swung open. A sharply dressed driver in a crisp black suit stepped out, straightened his cuffs, and scanned the crowd. Then, in a calm, professional voice, he said, "I'm looking for a man named Charlie." Charlie's heart stopped. Every head in the shelter turned toward him. A cold chill ran down his spine. What the hell was going on? Slowly, unsure of what else to do, Charlie raised a hand. "Yeah, that's me." The driver nodded, then turned and walked to the back of the Rolls-Royce. With a smooth motion, he pulled the door open. And out stepped Robert De Niro. The shelter went dead silent. Charlie's mouth went dry. Robert. Freaking De Niro. The same man he had spoken to the night before. The same man he had failed to recognize. De Niro adjusted his coat, his expression unreadable, then took a few slow steps toward Charlie. "Charlie," he said, his voice smooth as ever, "you got some time to talk?" Charlie's throat went tight. He glanced around, half expecting this to be some kind of elaborate joke. But it wasn't. This was real. Yes, sir," Charlie stammered, still trying to process what was happening. De Niro nodded toward the Rolls-Royce. "Come on, hop in." Charlie hesitated for only a second before his feet moved on their own. The moment he slid into the soft leather seat, the scent of luxury hit him. Expensive cologne, fine leather, polished wood. The door shut behind him with a quiet thunk. Outside, the entire shelter watched in shock as the Rolls-Royce pulled away, gliding down the street as if it had never belonged in that part of the city to begin with. For the first few minutes, Charlie couldn't speak. He kept his hands in his lap, afraid to touch anything, afraid this entire moment would vanish like some impossible dream. De Niro, sitting beside him, just watched him with that same patient expression from the night before. Finally, Charlie found his voice. I don't understand," he said, his throat dry. "Why are you doing this?" De Niro smirked slightly, leaning back in his seat. "I liked our conversation yesterday," he said simply, "and I believe in second chances." Charlie blinked, his heart racing. He struggled to find words. "I don't get it." "What do you mean?" De Niro exhaled, then turned slightly toward him. "I own a few restaurants," he said, "and I need people who know how to work hard." Charlie's breath caught. A job. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a chance. Charlie shook his head in disbelief. "You serious?" De Niro's smirk widened. "Dead serious." Charlie swallowed the lump in his throat. His entire body felt weightless. A job. A way out. A second chance. His fingers curled into fists in his lap. He wasn't going to mess this up. "Yes," he said, his voice firm for the first time in years. "Yes, sir, I won't let you down." De Niro patted him on the shoulder. "Good. Then let's get you cleaned up. You start Monday." Charlie's chest tightened. His vision blurred with the sting of tears he hadn't allowed himself to cry in years. Yesterday, he had begged for $1. Today he was sitting in a Rolls-Royce, being offered a second chance at life. And all because one man had stopped to listen.